Hello. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Happy to invite you again for our conference.
Thank you very much for having me again.
It's our pleasure, sir, actually, as well as privilege too.
Yeah.
So shall we start the session also? So shall we start the session?
Yes, why not?
Warm greetings to you all. It is indeed my pleasure to welcome you all for the validity session of the 3-day National Conference on Vision for India 2047, sponsored by the Indian Council of Social Science Research, New Delhi. I extend my hearty welcome to our resource person, Professor Sachin C. Kedkar. Sir, we are really obliged to you for accepting our invitation again.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me again.
It is indeed an honor to us, sir. Let me take this opportunity to introduce Professor Sachin Kedkar to the participants of our conference. Sir is at present serving as a professor in English, Faculty of Arts, the Maharaja Sayajirao University of Baroda. Professor is a bilingual writer, translator, editor, blogger, and a researcher. He published 2 anthologies of Marathi poetry. His poems have been translated into Gujarati, Hindi, Urdu, Malayalam, and Telugu. He published a collection of Marathi articles on contemporary Marathi poetry, globalization, and translation. His books in English include Skin, Spam, and Other Fake Encounters, selected Marathi poems in translation. Migrating Words, Reflections on Indian Translation Studies, and A Dish for the Dead Dog and Other Incantations. He has extensively translated present-day Marathi poetry, most of which is collected in the anthology Live Update, an anthology of recent Marathi poetry. Apart from rendering the 15th century Gujarati poet Narasingh Mehta for his doctoral research, he has also translated numerous Gujarati writers like Ghulam Muhammad Sheikh, Bhuban Kaka, Jain Khatri, Rajendra Patel, Jaydev Shukla, Rajesh Pandya, Nazir Mansoori, and Mona Patrawala into English. And our Professor won the Indian Literature Poetry Translation Prize by Indian Literature Journal, Sahitya Akademi, New Delhi, for translation of modern Gujarati poetry in 2000. He has also translated fiction by George Louis Borges, Ted Hughes, and Adam Todd into Marathi. Currently, he is working on a critical history of Marathi literature. And with this brief bio note of our professor, I request our resource person, Professor Sachin C. Kedkar, to deliver a keynote address on Spectres of Gandhi and the Democracy to Come. So please, the session is over now.
Thank you very much, Dr. Parthasarathy, for having me again. Once again, it's also always a pleasure to be here. and it's an honor to deliver a lecture in front of such erudite audience. And I would like to thank Sri S. Ramaswamy Naidu Memorial College, Sattur, once again for having me for this very timely and crucial seminar on Vision for India 2047. I had a look at the speakers who have delivered the lecture, and I feel it's my honor to be part of such distinguished speakers. What I want to do today is look at Gandhi and begin in some way my forays into Gandhi studies, which is a vast body of discourse, and there are hundreds of even biographies of Gandhi that have appeared. So given this kind of vastness of Gandhi studies, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to briefly touch upon some aspects of Gandhi's legacy in tandem with another very eminent philosopher, Jacques Derrida, and his meditations on the structure of Western thought. And if you allow me, I will make my presentation, PPT. And at the outset, I want to say that it's not a complete PPT, and there are many things that I would read out from the book and speak extempore. But some of the things that I have been able to put up on my PowerPoint may be useful for all of you to have in front while we discuss this topic. I will share my screen with you. Is my screen visible?
Yes, sir, it is visible now.
Yeah. So this is what I have in mind. So what I want to do is to read and try to understand Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi's legacy using the rich philosophical insights offered by the writings of the French philosopher Jacques Derrida in his books like Spectres of Marx, The Politics of Friendship, Philosophy in the Time of Terror, Dialogues with Habermas and Derrida, and Rogues, which are two essays on reason. This is a beginning of a project, so I will be just talking about some of my, what should I say, findings, to use a very plain word. And what I'm trying to do by putting Derrida and Gandhi together is not that I'm trying to make a case for a postmodern Gandhi or even post-structuralist Gandhi, because these labels I find extremely ambiguous and not really helpful when I think of many things. But what I'm trying to do is to explore to what extent Derrida's political writings can help us to understand the legacies of Gandhi's lives and works. Both these intellectuals, of course, come from very different cultural spaces and histories and traditions, and their projects are also exceedingly different from each other. Their contexts are very different. However, I argue that the insights in the writing of Derrida can help us examine Gandhi from a different point of view. And there are certain points at which their thought does come together in spite of historical and philosophical differences between these two thinkers. What I'm not also doing here is Gandhi has always believed that it's action that defines him, that his life is his message, while Derrida is more in the school of philosophy and thought. So there is this binary between thinking and acting, which Derrida himself has critically engaged, and something that I am not going to touch upon right now for the present purpose. His later books, especially towards the end of the 80s, have taken on ostensibly direct political themes for his writings. So what is often termed as late Derrida, or the turn, political turn in Derrida, something which he himself denies, because he always believed that deconstruction is always through and through a political act, because it's about difference of various kinds. So let's take a look at the legacies of Gandhi. And Gandhi is one of the most popular figures on Indian subcontinent. And maybe all of us have encountered some Gandhi, even if it is on the currency note that we use while buying things in the marketplace, ironically placed. However, some leading intellectuals have thought of afterlives of Gandhi, and of many Gandhis, we will take a brief overview of how many kinds of Gandhis have been enumerated by scholars till now. And the most famous and probably well-known statement is by Ashish Nandi in the year 2000, who identifies 4 Gandhis who have survived Gandhi's death. The first Gandhi is the Gandhi of Indian state and Indian nationalism, and he is very often coronated as the patron saint of India's first republic. And this is the Gandhi that you very often find on our currency notes and the government advertisements that we often see. He is the Gandhi of the state, Indian state. The second Gandhi is Gandhi of the Gandhians, whom Ashish Nandi notes as being occasionally quite lovable and has a grandfatherly and benign presence in the Indian public lore. But he's also a crushing bore, apart from being a Victorian Puritan mistakenly born in India. So this is the second Gandhi, and this is the Gandhi that is very often so religiously followed by people who follow the sect of Gandhi. That's how you want to put it. The third Gandhi that Ashish Nandi distinguishes is the Gandhi of ragamuffins, eccentrics, and the unpredictables. Vintage Hinswaraj, as he calls it. He's also a nag and spoil sport. He inspires Vandana Shiva, Medha Patkar, Claude Avarice, or Shivram Karan. He has subversive affiliations, keeps evil company, and according to Nandi, prefers jeans over khadi and does not abjure alcohol. Nowadays, wherever global capitalism goes, it takes with it political activism, NGOs, and jhulawalas, and this Gandhi is usually to be found with them. So this is the third Gandhi, who of people who are very sharply critical of the state, and you can see how he is in contrast to first 2 Gandhis. The fourth Gandhi is primarily a mythic and unread Gandhi, who has admirers in environmental, anti-nuclear, and feminist movements. He is a symbol of those struggling against injustice, while retaining their humanity even when faced with unqualified inhumanity. According to Nandi, he walks the mean streets of the world, threatening the status quo, glib bullies everywhere. And Nandi very interestingly says, I do not care who the real Gandhi was or is. They are tools for analysis, and that means they are unreal and not true. Something that I would like to highlight, that all these Gandhis are in some way abstractions, and at the same time, they are not real according to Nandi. And you do not have to choose between any of these 4, because any Gandhi can be dangerous out of these 4. It is much better if you hang his portrait in your office or home, like many others do, says Nandi, to show your respect to this new addition to the Indian pantheon of gods that keeps on multiplying every day, and then take your children to a picnic on public holiday that his birthday has become. So a kind of ironical warning that or sarcastic warning that Nandi gives is not to actually look for or try to engage with any of these four Gandhis. It's better to distance yourself and enjoy holiday on his birthday. That's where his sarcasm is pointed at. What is the reason that people never leave Gandhi alone, or people always keep on talking about Gandhi? And why is Gandhi being talked about so much, especially in today's times? And Tanika Sarkar in 2011 has pointed out that the most of the recent scholarship on Gandhi is propelled by three urgent contemporary concerns. The first concern is the growth of communalism, making secular historians turn to histories of tolerance, and hence to a Gandhi who was a martyr to communalism. This is rather obvious in the present times. The other urgent contemporary concern is coming from post-colonial scholars like Nandi very often about what is authentic and what is derivative in Indian modernity. And for moderns like Gandhi, these post-colonial scholars find that he was firmly anchored in Indian tradition. And so it provides a kind of interesting or useful way to look at what can be called as Indian modernity. So what is authentic and derivative in Indian modernity can be understood by engaging with Gandhian thought. That's the other post-colonial concern. The third comes from discontent with modern developmental paradigms. And this renews significance of Gandhi, who was a forceful critique of industrialism and industrial capitalism. But then there are other Gandhis as well. There is Annie Besant's Gandhi, there is Nehru's Gandhi, there is Ambedkar's Gandhi, and there is Ambedkarites' Gandhi. There is Jinnah's Gandhi, there is Churchill's Gandhi, there is Savarkar's Gandhi, and the Gandhi of the Marxists. There is also Godse's Gandhi. There is Rabindranath Tagore's Gandhi, there is Sri Aurobindo's Gandhi. There is also Sir Vidyadhar Naipaul's Gandhi, and the Gandhi of the vegetarians, and the Gandhi of the feminists. We also have Attenborough's Gandhi, and we also have Munna Bhai MBBS Gandhi and his Gandhigiri. So you can see that there is a certain kind of diversity that of Gandhian legacy in India today, and it raises certain questions that we are trying to grapple with, trying to understand today when we start thinking of what India will be in 2047, that is 25 years from hence. What kind of India do we envisage? So when we start thinking about India of 2047, we cannot bypass any of Gandhi so easily, right? In a way, Gandhi that we will be engaging with till 2047 is, to use Derrida's term, a spectral Gandhi or specters of Gandhi whom we cannot avoid. Because what is the idea of India that, what is the nation that we are trying to imagine, which we will be looking at in 2047. And in that picture, you cannot keep the specters of Gandhi out so easily. So what do we mean, and what does Derrida even mean when he talks of specters of Gandhi? Something that we would like to think a bit about. However, let us also take a look at the Gandhi everyone loves to hate. And everybody has problems with Gandhi. and that is what makes it so inconvenient. So one of the most inconvenient person is the father of the nation very often, arguing that Gandhi was his own best critic, and his conception of truth remained hermeneutic, dialectical, and dialogical, and that his life opened up many possibilities that we should be prepared to entertain. Vinay Lal, in his essay titled "The Gandhi Everyone Loves to Hate," 2008, points out that Gandhi's critics can be divided into two groups. The first group, which is the majority of his critics, usually focus on particular positions that he adopted, on certain phenomena and issues on which he is alleged to have held views that are constructed as inadequate, if not outrageous. That's the first group of critics who have always attacked Gandhi's views. For example, on some issue, particular issues, say for example, Khilafat or whatever. Then there are other groups of critics, mostly anthologized in the book called Indian Critiques of Gandhi, have been less fixated on particular issues and are animated by specific worldviews, says Vinay Lal. And these are Marxist, feminists, secularists, and developmentalists. And you can include Ambedkar as a secularist and developmentalist. And these people have come with a certain kind of larger worldview through which Gandhi is being critiqued and criticized. Vinay Lal points out that while Gandhi was someone who everyone loved to hate, there was no singular Gandhi that everyone loved to hate. And that's the irony. So even if there was a Gandhi that you dislike, there was another Gandhi that you like, and the vice versa. I'm sorry. Yeah. For if environmentalists, pacifists, conscientious objectors, non-violent activists, nudists, naturopaths, vegetarians, prohibitionists, social reformers, internationalists, moralists, trade union leaders, political dissidents, hunger strikers, anarchists, Luddites, celibates, anti-globalization activists, pluralists, ecumenists, walkers, and many others have at least one time or the other claimed Gandhi as their patron saint, or at least have drawn some inspiration from him. And then one is free to choose Gandhi which you dislike. So you may choose Gandhi of non-violence, but you may dislike the Gandhi who upheld Varnashram Dharma or had very conservative views about women, for example. But when you select oppose one Gandhi, you again have to select another one. So if you say that you opposed Gandhi's position on partition and 55 crore rupees that was to be given to Pakistan, you may dislike Gandhi for that. But then you would also want his passionate nationalism or vegetarianism or other ideas which you may like. So it happens that you are kind of in the plurality of Gandhi, of many Gandhis, that while you select one, you oppose one. So this kind of almost multiplicity and heterogeneity of Gandhi's presence in his absence is what is on our plate when we sit up thinking about Gandhi in 2022, after coronavirus pandemic seems to have slowly receding, hopefully, and at the same time you see the possibility of Third World War emerging on the horizon, as if one crisis and there is another crisis. So what do we make of Gandhi? What shall we do with Gandhi in 2022 is for me as much an important question as what is India of 2047? Just a minute. I think there is some problem here. So if you can see my screen now again. Yeah. Okay. So what do we even mean by the terms specters, and what are we to do with this multiplicity of Gandhis, very often contradictory to each other? And the person who has, in a very radical or novel way, engaged with this question of plurality of legacies and the questions of democracy and future of democracy is Jacques Derrida. And he developed the notions of specters and spectralities in his famous deconstructive reflections on Karl Marx after the collapse of the Soviet Union, in his book, collected in his book, The Specters of Marx, 1994. He reads Marx's legacy as part of his broader Heideggerian project to critically assess and reconstitute heritage of Western philosophical thoughts for its blind spots, inconsistencies, asymmetries, logical aporias, omissions, and repressions. The larger questions of inheritance, justice, and learning to live frame Derrida's reading. And he discusses legacies of Marx by commenting on the first line of Communist Manifesto, which talks of a specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism, by evoking Hamlet's father's ghost in Shakespeare's Hamlet, and a figure of European Hamlet meditating upon various illustrious skulls of thinkers like Leibniz, Kant, Hegel, Marx in Paul Valéry's text, The Crisis of Spirit, which appeared in 1919. And while many of us are familiar with Hamlet, Shakespeare's Hamlet and Father's Ghost, which becomes one of the tropes in Derrida's reflection, Paul Valéry's text, The Crisis of Spirit, actually in a passage talks about European Hamlet, and where he's thinking about the question of what it means to be European. And he evokes various, the whole scene in Hamlet, where Hamlet looks at various skulls. And the European Hamlet, that is a typical European intellectual, looks upon these thinkers like Leibniz, Kant, Hegel, and Marx, and meditates upon their skulls and comes to a conclusion that we cannot be European, or if we have to be European, then we will have to look at these illustrious skulls, to use that metaphor. So we stand in a something similar position, that Indian Hamlet in 2022 will have to look upon illustrious skulls very often to decide who we are and who we want to be in 2027. And one of the most illustrious skull will be of Gandhi. Maybe the second would be of Ambedkar, maybe. But we'll have to reflect on these great illustrious skulls. And we have to reflect upon their legacies. Derrida stresses, first of all, the radical and necessary heterogeneity of an inheritance. So any important inheritance that is significant in the present time, for Derrida, will be radical and necessarily heterogeneous. It cannot be a homogeneous kind of legacy. So what we are dealing with in Gandhi's case is because of the significance and relevance of Gandhi in contemporary times and while thinking about our future. And this legacy, in order to be significant, will be radical and necessarily heterogeneous. An inheritance which is never gathered together, it is never one with itself, it is presumed unity, can consist only in injunctions to affirming by choosing. One must filter, sift, criticize. One must sort out several possibilities. If the readability of a legacy were given, natural and transparent, univocal, if it did not call for and at the same time defy interpretation, we would never have anything to inherit from it, says Derrida. And this is extremely significant when we are looking at Gandhi's legacies. Yeah. And there is an interesting critique by Gandhi of Marx, something that I have not dealt with in detail, but very interestingly unavoidable at certain point that we may bring up. So there are many Marxes. There is Stalin's Marx, and there is Mao's Marx, and there is Derrida's Marx, and there are Marx of many thinkers. Similarly, there is also Marx of Gandhi, and maybe we need to touch him at some point, but given the limitations of time, we won't be able to go into that. So what do we mean by specters and spectrality? When we talk of specters of Marx or specters of Gandhi as a necessary and radical condition for a legacy to be significant. The notion of specter in Derrida is analogous to his other concepts like scandal or hymen or supplement or pharmacon that cannot be reduced to binaristic structure of Western thought. The binaristic structure of Western thought, as some of you may be aware, those who are teaching theory or studying literal theory at some point are aware of Derrida's philosophical and theoretical moves. The binaristic structure of Western thought, Derrida argues and demonstrates, is already always underwritten by Heideggerian metaphysics of presence, which makes one term in the binary asymmetric and central, while the other is considered to be constituted by lack and absence, hence peripheral or marginal, or is even repressed in very Western thinking. For example, white versus black, where white is seen as presence of something, while black is seen as absence of white. Man versus woman, where woman is seen as lacking all that man is not, defined by a lack in patriarchal structures of Western thought. Nature versus culture, speech versus writing, where speech is thought of as something which happens face to face. And interestingly, it never happens face to face if Derrida is to believe. And this is ironical at the moment when we are talking face to face, and yet we are not face to face on Zoom. Writing, according to Derrida, is more originary than speech. And finally, life versus death. And we tend to think of death as what is lacking in life, as the other of life, as something which is inherently negative, to be repressed, not to be thought of, or something which does not have presence of everything that life stands for. Thus, Western thinking, argues Derrida, is inherently logocentric because of this asymmetries produced by Heideggerian metaphysics of presence. The deconstructive reading subversively reverses these binaries to expose this metaphysical heritage and allows for an alternative reading based on making the other terms central and asymmetric to be as valid as first reading. So what Derrida often does is to subvert this binarisms, nature versus culture, speech versus writing, making speech stand for making speech central and displacing, making writing central and displacing speech, making woman central and displacing man. Because binarisms in definition mean that both define each other. But in actual practice, it is one which is considered as significant, important, originary, while the other is seen as derivative or lacking something. So what happens when you overturn these binaries is that it results in aporia or undecidability underlying any interpretation of a text. Derrida argues that this deconstruction happens because of the differential differ plus differ structure of language and is thus inescapable. And that is where in his very famous essay called Structure, Sign and Play, which many people study and teach, he talks about how language, the question of language becomes very central because this metaphysical heritage is encoded in and through language. So language bears within itself necessity of its own critique, is what he points out in his very famous oft-anthologized essay. So spectre or the ghost is neither living nor dead, just like scandal that he talks of in Structure, Sign and Play is that of incest taboo. And he points out how all cultures have incest taboo. So it is at once universal, at the same time it's cultural. So in spite of cultural diversity, it is something that is there in all cultures and so universal. Now, this kind of paradoxical place of incest taboo in the writings of Claude Lévi-Strauss makes it scandal. Similarly, pharmakon in Greek meant both remedy as well as poison. And supplement is again a term that he finds. So Derrida's discourse is a kind of growing discourse rather than a fixed theory, which looks at various aspects of Western thought, teasing out these things which cannot be fit within these binaries. So incest taboo cannot fit nature culture binary, and so on and so forth. In same way, spectre or a ghost is neither living nor dead. It cannot fit within the binary of life and death. And it becomes extremely important for Derrida because the spectre is neither substance, he says, nor essence, nor existence is ever present as such. As such, nothing is present, but at the same time, it is present. So that's the paradox. And thus, question of learning to live for Derrida is question of learning to live with ghosts in the upkeep, the conversation, the company, or the companionship in the commerce without commerce of ghosts. This being with specters would also be a politics of memory, of inheritance, and of generations. The questions of legacies as specters are inseparable from the questions of justice, which he distinguishes from law, and that go beyond the present. So legacies of specters, specters of Marx or specters of Gandhi, for example, are inseparable from questions of justice and also inseparable from the questions of responsibility. And for Derrida, the question of responsibility is redefined by being responsible not just to those who are alive, but also responsible to specters, those who are not yet born and those who are dead. So as human beings, our ethics or deconstructive ethics for Derrida would be responsibility not just to people around us, but people who are dead and people who are yet to die or people who are yet to be born. Not only the victims who are already dead, he points out, due to all forms of violence and oppression, but also the victims who are not yet born, the victims of future, right? The people who have not yet died in Ukraine invasion by Russia. People. So in some sense, we on philosophy own some responsibility to those people as well. And that is where he wants to situate his radical ethics, if you want to use that term. in his very famous books, especially Rogues, and another book called Philosophy in the Time of Terror, kind of dialogue written after 9/11 attack on World WTC towers. Derrida took to look at the questions of democracy, right? And he also visited that in his very famous book called Politics of Friendship. And the famous book Politics of Friendship talks about how the question of the political is often defined in political thought in terms of enemies, giving centrality to enemy or who you consider to be the enemy. So politics is defined by the figure of enemy, while the question of friendship is often repressed, right? The binary between friendship and enmity. So Derrida overturns this metaphysical binary and points out how friendship have very often been deeply political and played a kind of formative role in politics. Consider what is happening right now when Ukraine wanted to join NATO, and Russia saw that as a kind of aggression on itself, and how Ukraine is appealing to various nations, including India, for friendship. So how alliances and friendship shape what we understand by political needs to be highlighted. And this becomes particularly prominent, according to Derrida, in when it comes to numbers. And remember, democracy is very often about numbers. So how do you go about getting the right numbers to win the elections? And there are elections underway as we, because there are always elections underway in India all the time. So, and democracy becomes the game of numbers and demography. And the numbers can be constituted through the language of friendship and language of enmity. So that's what seems to be going on at all the time. And that is what he discusses in his book, The Politics of Friendship. But his later books, like The Rogues and Politics in the Time of Terror, Philosophy in the Time of Terror, look at democracy at with certain kind of critical, deconstructive probing. And we are very familiar with the notions of genealogies and teleologies. And one of the arguments that Derrida has been making right from his very first important statement, structure, sign, and play, in the context of human sciences, is that our understanding of history is very often linear, and it's determined by eschatologies, which are deeply Christian or Western at times. So while thinking about democracy and democracy to come, the term that I will talk about shortly, is continuation of his critique of understanding of history as teleological, as eschatological, which means our historiography is deeply metaphysical, to emphasize what he's saying. So he examines genealogies of democracy in his book called Rogues, 2 essays on reason, and points out that the contemporary problematics of what democracy is and what it can be traced back to Plato's Republic, which states that democracy is in the end neither the name of the regime nor the name of constitution, and is not constitutional form among others. So Plato is very clear on this, that democracy in itself cannot be a form of polity, which is strange, right? Because all of us are used to think of democracy itself as a form of polity. And yet there has been so addition to the monarchic, plutocratic, tyrannical democracies of antiquity, says Derrida, and so many so-called modern democratic regimes regimes that at least present themselves as democratic. That is, under the name and in the name, the always Greek name. Let us never forget of democracy at once monarchic, what can be called constitutional monarchy, and parliamentary, found in large number of European nation states, popular democracy, direct or indirect democracy, parliamentary democracy, whether presidential as in the United States or not, or as in India, liberal democracy, Christian democracy, social democracy, military democracy, authoritarian democracy, and so on. Thus, democracy is a plural, unequivocal, deeply ambivalent and ambiguous notion, and also heterogeneous notion, which is marked by difference, internal difference. And another very important argument that Derrida develops is that it is also part of Greco-Christian and globalizing. That's the term he invents, global Latinizing, right? So what does he mean by that? Is that our political discourse, our prevailing international juridico-political discourse is seeped with these Greco-Christian notions of democracy and the reason that underlies democracy. And he goes on to look at how the rationality, Enlightenment rationality, which resulted in democracy, was deeply Christian. And for that, he looks at a very interesting essay by Immanuel Kant called Religion Within the Limits of Reason. And what he does is that he points out how the very notion of religion in the rationalist, Enlightenment rationalist, that is the modern notion of religion, is clandestinely Christian, something that he goes on to demonstrate at length, especially when Kant makes the distinction between dogmatic religion and pragmatic religion. And pragmatic religion has features of Christianity. Pragmatic religion is the one which allows this secularity and Enlightenment rationality to flourish as against dogmatic religions. And he doesn't name them, but obviously the other religions that Europeans thought of were largely Judaism and Islam. So which becomes for Kant a dogmatic religion. So this distinction between a dogmatic religion and pragmatic religion seems to prefigure, and that's my own view, the whole clash of civilization thesis that became very popular in the 90s, right? So what is the reason for this clash of civilizational thesis? According to Derrida, would be this globalizing and Greco-Christian notions of international political discourse. He talks about certain inbuilt aporias of democracy. And he also talks of certain autoimmunity of Eurocentric modernity. According to him, this Greco-Christian globalizing, and it's a new term that he has coined, paradigm of democracy, which is internally plural and heterogeneous, produces typical aporias of democracy. Like the fact that all assaults on democracy are in the name of democracy. And he talks about how Nazis and how Italian fascists were democratically elected, right? So democracy has this inbuilt mechanism which attacks itself, very much like autoimmunity, and that's the term he uses, that democracy is given to autoimmunity, and we are aware of what autoimmune disorders or diseases are, like arthritis or others, where our body attacks our body. Why? To save it from itself. It goes haywire, it attacks itself because it perceives itself as the enemy. So this kind of autoimmune reactions is the part of mechanism underlying this globalizing Greco-Christian heritage of democracy. And this is how most of the attacks on democracy are carried out through the vocabulary of democracy and free speech. So people who attack free speech are doing it under the name of free speech very often. And that's how dictatorships come to power. Whether it is Xi Jinping or Putin, they are elected. We should keep this in mind. So democracy has this mechanism where it attacks itself and can turn suicidal, to use Derrida's term. Right? It can attack itself. And so the aporia for democracy is, can you be so democratic to allow undemocratic practices and ideologies to flourish, right? And that's the aporia or the paradox of democracy that he talks about. Now, why am I speaking of this at length is because the question of democracy and violence and democracy to come that he talks about is something that Gandhi also has grappled with at some length critically. And Gandhi very shrewdly, and this is where probably one of the important contributions of Gandhi lies, that he's critical of this Greco-Christian globalizing paradigm of democracy that comes to us from the West. He's almost saying that we need a new kind of formulation for democracy. And this industrial capitalism democracy is not going to help. And in Hind Swaraj, he uses extremely harsh language to talk about parliamentary democracy that you find in Europe, and which has become a role model for Indians, right? And something that we copied. So parliamentary democracy, I don't know if I have time to talk about it, but he uses words like parliamentary democracy is prostitute, right? This is the word Gandhi uses in his very important book called Hind Swaraj. And he talks of the necessity of enlightened anarchy. And he believes, and he redefines the whole nation of Swaraj, as many of us are aware. Swaraj that existed in discourse before Gandhi, especially in philosophical and political thought of Tilak, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, who used Swaraj is my birthright, right? So Swaraj, as it exists in language of Tilak, has been redefined by Gandhi. What he does is, for Tilak, Swaraj can be obtained by any means. They may be violent, non-violent, they may be any means. Sadhana nam anekta. He talks about anek sadhan that can be used to achieve Swarajya. Gandhi defined, completely overturned this whole paradigm of Swaraj. For Gandhi, Swaraj is control over yourself. Swa as Atman or self, and control over oneself, one's desire to kill, one's baser instincts, one's instincts of violence or instincts of hatred has to be suppressed, controlled. So this control of yourself is what Swarajya is. And if human beings are able to achieve this Swaraj, then political independence is a byproduct. For him, that is not very important. So Swaraj. Another thing from Tilak that he redefines is the notion of means and ends. For Gandhi, ends are not important. Means are important, and means have to be those of truth, spiritual truth, and purity, to use his words. You cannot achieve Swaraj through violence, because violence or untruth or lying or deceit, anything that you gain by that can be undone by the very same thing. That was his argument, and which does not give you any moral high ground compared to your enemy. If you're going to murder your enemy who has come to murder you, you are a murderer. So it does not make you any better than him. That is the kind of theory he develops. And one very interesting way that I will just read out some of his quotes and stop because we are running out of time. This is what he wrote in 1937 in Harijan. Gandhi says, by political independence, I do not mean imitation of British House of Commons or the Soviet rule of Russia or the fascist rule of Italy or the Nazi rule in Germany. They have systems suited to their geniuses. We must have ours, suited to ours. What that can be is more than I can tell. I have described it as Ram Raj, sovereignty of people based on pure moral authority. So this is another paradigm that he is developing. And for him, again, he says in another place that in democracy, which I envisage, a democracy established by non-violence, there will be equal freedom for all. Everybody will be own master. So what do you mean by Ram Raj? And this is a burning issue, right? Very often. Very often Gandhi insists that you cannot have irreligious politics. And this is again where Derrida evokes the term called messianic, irreligious messianism without the Messiah is something that can become possible through democracy to come. For Gandhi, this religious politics or politics of bhakti or adhyatmic politics, if he wants to call it that, is not communal politics, because religion for Gandhi, and we'll hear what he says in Young India 1924, he says that for me there is no politics without religion, not the religion of the superstitious and the blind, religion that hates and fights, but the universal religion of tolerance, politics without morality. That is the thing to be avoided. And that, he says in another place, this politics is to establish kingdom of heaven. And commenting on socialism, he goes on to say that class war is foreign to essential genius of India. He is critiquing Marx, which is capable of evolving communism on fundamental rights of equal justice. Ram Rajya of my dreams ensures right of alike of prince and pauper. So what is this notion of religion in Gandhi that he wants to base his politics on? And he says that very clearly in Hind Swaraj itself. For him, it is not Hinduism, it's not Islam, it's not Christianity, it's which religion he's talking about. The phrase that he uses is religion, which is underlying all religion. And the metaphor that he keeps on using throughout his discourse is that of a tree. All religions are branches of the same tree, whether it's Hinduism or Islam. So the real religion is the tree. And that should be the basis of politics, according to Gandhi. Derrida talks about something called chora. Chora is in Greek an opening or a space which makes politics and everything else possible. For Gandhi, that idea is that of dharma. And by dharma, he means that which binds. And he says that dharma is what ties man to God and man to man. So dharma becomes the foundation of politics. And if it does not bind man to man, it is not dharma. Right? So the whole trope of Gandhian religion is to develop a political language, a conceptual frame, which is not derived from this Greco-Christian globalizing paradigm of democracy, which produces violence very often in autoimmune form, but something which is based on self, ethics, and dharma. Something which is based on ethics, and the ethics are that of love. And for love, he uses a synonym called ahimsa. And that is very interesting. And as a practice, he coins the word satyagraha as insistence on truth. Satya is a very interesting term, and he says it's derived from sat, that is to exist, being. And that's why Satya and God are one and the same. God is truth. That is his interpretation of scriptures. And you can see that one of the important formulations of Gandhi is to develop an inclusive idea, egalitarian idea of society and nation, which is based on intellectual frames which are indigenous, but reinterpreted in modern light, rather than deriving it from to Greco-Christian globalizing paradigms of democracy. So this is what I have to say for today. And I'm sure, and this is a work in progress, and maybe I will be able to come up with an essay or something on this aspect. And this is where I would love to stop. And I would be very happy to have question answers and discussions on whatever I have to say. So I want to end my presentation and thank Dr. Parthasarathi once again and Sattur College once again for having me here and share my ongoing research on the topic. So if there are questions, I would be happy to take them.
Dear participants, if you have any questions, you can ask by unmuting yourself, or even you can put it in our chat.
Sir, good afternoon, sir. Hello.
Yeah, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Sir, thanks for your wonderful presentation. Really, it was very thought-provoking. I was really admire the way you present, and it's highly philosophical and very. It is really very pragmatic ideas and all you have given. So really, I appreciate you and for your wonderful presentation. But I don't even know that how many of you understood these things, because more of a philosophy and very beautiful collaboration of Jacques Derrida, the postmodern philosopher from French, and also our own national father Gandhiji. Wonderful comparison you have given, but I have a little bit of clarification I need. Because you said Jacques Derrida, he bases his idea more of Heidegger, who speaks of idea, and Leibniz, who speaks of monads and all. And also Kant, who speaks of pragmatism and more of a categorical imperative and all he speaks. So Jacques Derrida, more of his philosophy is based on deconstruction. Okay, and these people, they are speaking in ideas, but our national leader Gandhiji, he speaks of justice and responsibilities. So in which place they meet each other? Like you said, Dharma and Kora, a beautiful place, they meet each other. Is there any other places they meet each other? And how does they coincide with each other? If it is if you give more, little bit of explanation, it would be nice, I think. Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, thank you for that very important question. Apart from that, also turning a very important aspect, and I'm glad that you brought this up, is that Derrida's one of the argument is that what we call as secular globalized politics today also has a history and a genealogy which goes back into theology very often of various kinds, especially Greco-Christian kind. So in spite of the fact that we talk of secular global politics, there is a theological dimension which cannot be overlooked. So so the political cannot be thought of as existing in completely another domain from theological or religious. And that is where Gandhi and Derrida seem to come together. That for Gandhi, what is political can only, it has to be based on spiritual and religious. It cannot be irreligious. Something similar to what Derrida calls messianism or messianism without messiah. All right. So idea of dharma, satyagraha are the core principles. Ahimsa are the core principles of politics for Gandhi, which are non-negotiable. So he is not trying to come up with a secular politics, but something which is grounded in the indigenous theology. But at the same time, he is quite aware of the danger of such kind of grounding politics in certain religious spiritual domains. And that is why Gandhi himself, being aware of it, redefines it, religion as not a particular religion, not Christianity, not Hinduism, not Zoroastrianism, not any particular religion, but religion that is underlying all the religions. And the metaphor that he uses is that of a tree where there are various branches. And he gives examples how core ideas of Advait and core ideas of Islam very often gel. And so what he's trying to do is to base politics not so much in religion, but in spirituality. And this, for me, is a place which brings Derrida as well as Gandhi together for a certain time. Though they are not saying the same thing, which I pointed out, there are certain points where there can be a discussion. And as you rightly pointed out, the idea, and the other idea is that of violence. For Derrida, violence comes very often from the autoimmune system of modernity itself, Western modernity. And by what do we mean by autoimmune is it cannot make out whether something is internal or external, whether it's part of our body or not. So he's talking about terrorism. So whether the threat to terrorism comes from within the state or outside, you cannot, while enemy is often outside, the terrorist cannot be located where. So enemies cannot be located. So he uses the term autoimmunes. So very often it happens that there are places where democracy can be subverted in the name of democracy. And Gandhi is aware of that. And that's why Gandhi insists not on democracy as a legislative parliamentary system, but democracy as enlightened anarchy, right? So another thing, and the whole question based on non-violence is also something where Derrida and Gandhi could have a kind of convergence on the question of violence. So alternative model of democracy, which can be only created through democratic premises, right, is what brings Gandhi and Derrida together again. Okay. So these are the points where they can converge. There are many other points, the question of action and thinking and action is a binary deeply seated in Western thought, which Derrida deconstruct, but I have not gone into that. But Gandhi, for him, karma, right, has to be based on dharma. And dharma is something that connects man to God and man to man. And the basis of it can only be love. No other thing can connect God, man, and other men. And that is what he calls ahimsa. Ahimsa is not as absence of violence, but presence of love. That's how he defines it. So I think that these parallels between these two similarities of the projects of to come up with alternative paradigms of democracy is a point where they can have a conversation, come together for a while.
Okay, thank you, sir.
This is in a nutshell what I'm trying to say.
Yes, excellent, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for that question.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir, for such an enlightening and a perceptive session.
Thanks a lot.
As Dr. Anbalagan sir rightly said, it is an extensive study of philosophy and Gandhi. We got the experience of a course in Gandhian studies. We thoroughly enjoyed and learned about different Gandhis in this session. It is really a fascinating experience to learn about the father of our nation. We had an intellectual treatise of Gandhi and democracy in this session. Thank you so much, sir, for giving an intellectual feast to us in this post-lunch session. And dear participants, as we are at the end of our 3-day national conference, on behalf of Sri SRNMC and a 2TN Girls Battalion NCC Madurai, my sincere thanks to Almighty for His blessings and grace for organizing and completing this 3-day national multidisciplinary conference sponsored by the Indian Council of Social Science Research, New Delhi, in a successful manner. And I would take this opportunity to thank our commanding officer, Colonel Rakesh Prasad, for honoring us with his presence and delivering an address in the first day of our conference. Our colonel is a man of nobility, and his words motivate us to do greater and better in the forthcoming days. I extend my gratitude to our venerable principal, Dr. Ganesh Ram, who is being the catalyst that inspired us to do our best and stand as a pillar of power. Mere words are not enough to show our gratitude to our principal for his inspiration and influence in enriching our institution and we, the faculty members and the students as individuals. On behalf of the academic fraternity gathered here, I extend my sincere gratitude to our resource persons, Professor Tommy K. Kalakal, Professor Sachin C. Ketkar, Dr. C. Mutturaj, Dr. K.T. Tamilmani, Dr. Maya Ratna Sababadi, Dr. Debashis Nandi, Dr. Amit Verma, Dr. Ramanathan, and Lieutenant Dr. Richa Raj. Actually, they spent their busiest time gracing this occasion. We had intellectual feast for the past 3 days in all the 9 sessions of the conference. Thanks to all the speakers for adorning the occasion and sharing their opinions at our conference. And I express my gratitude to our chairpersons, Dr. Sumadhi, Dr. Harish Nirmal, Dr. Fatima Fazana, Dr. Badmashini, Dr. Sudha Devi, and Dr. Maritai for their valuable contribution. I have to thank my colleague, Dr. Harish Nirmal, for his involvement and willingness to assist me in the conference works beyond his comfort zones. I thank all the faculty members, research scholars, and students from various institutions across our country for their support and the contribution to this conference. I extend my thanks to research scholars Ms. Aruna Devi and Ms. Amarda for being a backbone to this successful event. I heartily thank Senior Under Officer Kavita and Under Officer Madhubala from our girls NCC for their assistance in making this event in a better way. I thank all who have contributed directly and indirectly in organizing this conference successfully. Thank you all once again. Sir, it is a real privilege and a thank you for us being with us.
Yes. Congratulations to you for our excellent organization. And thanks for having me here.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.
Dear participants, please stay. We have to discuss, I have to share with you few details regarding the publication and the certificate. Please stay. Okay. Here we are having the information regarding our certificates and the publication details. Please take a note of the dates, as well as I will share it in our WhatsApp group also for your reference. The participation and the presentation certificate will be shared on or before 1st March 2022. I repeat, the participation and the presentation certificates will be shared on or before 1st March 2022. And regarding book publication, the research paper of the conference will be compiled and published by Emerald Publishers. For this, we need a minimum of 2 months to get the hard copy of the book. So, you will get your copy of the book on or before 30th April 2022. Your addresses will be collected in your Google form to send the book through a courier to you. Regarding journal publication, the research papers of the conference will be published in Langley Journal. As it is stated in our brochure, it is an international peer-reviewed journal with a 5.61 impact factor. The editor of the journal needed 25 days to publish our paper in their journal. So we can get the copy of the journal, soft copy of the journal on or before 31st March 2022. So the soft copy of the journal will be received to us on or before 31st March 2022. I will post the same details in our WhatsApp group also for your reference. Kindly wait till the deadlines given here to get your certificates and the publications. And if you have any queries, please send me an email after receiving your certificates. I hope that it is clear to you. And the final feedback for our conference is posted in our group. Kindly fill it up.